Hello and welcome, fellow sinner. This video is gonna have me, a full-time devil and a part-time Santa's worker, telling you how exactly we're gonna rank some of the sins. These sins are derived from the Abrahamic religions, specifically the Bible, so they might be a little bit familiar to you. What I will say though is that these sins are action specific, so I didn't add any sins that I found too vague. An example of that would be something like being immoral, because in the Bible, immorality is literally anything that causes you to sin, so it's a little bit too vague. I want these to be quite specific. As you can see here, I have all of my letters readied up, and yes, G is on the bottom for a very particular reason. Starting with S tier sins, these are sins that I think should be illegal and are definitely bad for society, so all around terrible. Up next we have A, which literally stands for, don't do that! That one is specifically for sins that I can understand if there are legal repercussions. There may or may not be already legal repercussions, but they're definitely bad for society. Next we have B, that literally just stands for boo. These ones more often than not do not have legal repercussions, but they're mostly bad for society. Up next we have C, that literally just stands for cool-ish. They definitely don't need any legal repercussions, but when it comes to C, I am sticking with them more being neutral to society. Second to last, we have D, that literally stands for doesn't matter. To me, that means they rarely ever affect anybody, legally or otherwise. They don't affect your personhood, morality. More often than not, people can't even tell when you're doing this. So yeah, in the grand scheme of things, they don't matter that much. At the end, we have G tier. This tier stands for God cares, because more often than not, these are sins that only God himself can tell. As in, these sins happen more often than not in your head, and usually it's only God that cares about them. Okay, I hope that's straightforward enough. For our sins, because we're going to discuss quite a lot, feel free to scrub through the video. I'm going to put timestamps on what type of sins we're going to be going over. They are going to be themed after the 7 deadly sins, because I found that the easiest way to kind of categorize them in a way. And of course, to open the show, we're going to start with the sins that everybody loves, and they're the juiciest ones. Lust. Lust is going to be this color marker so we can differentiate it from everybody else. First up, we're going to go with just the word lust. This one is going to be categorized as mostly thoughts, so these are lustful thoughts that you yourself are having about other people. This one is going to be highly specific to thoughts because they're not necessarily actions quite yet. So a lot of the time, you may or may not even have control over them. For that reason, we're going to put it in C, because you can't really control them a lot of the time and they're not really actions yet. Let's hope they don't become actions if they're not consensual. There we have it. Up next, we have adultery. This one was actually quite hard to categorize because I didn't know whether or not we can actually justify having legal repercussions for something like this. But I feel like in our day and age when people are really enmeshed and entangled when it comes to their belongings with their significant other, this could be justified as something you could legally pursue. And I definitely think it's one of the nastiest things you can do to someone you love. If you do something like this, I really just don't trust you. For that reason, we're going to put it in A tier. Up next was another difficult one for me to categorize, and that is The reason that's difficult to categorize is because with the advent of the internet, more often than not, can consent to what they're doing now more than ever. That means they have more control and they're more aware of what their actions are going to lead to. But for this specific round, I'm going to go with more so the traditional understanding of and that's literally being paid to sleep with someone. I still have a lot of thoughts and a lot of thinking to do more so on that topic, honestly. But in the real world, a lot of the time, that type of arrangement is very coercive, and it's not safe for a lot of people. And for those reasons, I'm going to put it in C, even though I'm kind of teetering between C and B for this one. Next, we have something that's not really overtly talked about in the Bible, and that's The reason I've added it is because it's very common in the modern world to consume and I think it's connected enough to having lustful thoughts, but different enough in the actions that you have to take to warrant its own category. It's really hard what to think about this one, and I'm honestly teetering with it because it can be addicting, and the industry is not necessarily the safest, especially for women. But for now, if I'm thinking about just the average person consuming sometimes in the safety of their house, I'm gonna put it in C tier. After some further delegation, I've actually decided to move up to B because it doesn't feel right to have and in the same category. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has those days. Okay, moving on ahead, we have a personal favorite, and that is homosexuality. Not to overly plug myself, but I do have an entire video talking about this, so you can click on that if you want to know more. There's a lot of reasons why I'm going to put this in this specific tier. It doesn't harm anybody. No one can really know if it's you or not. No one can read your thoughts. Yada yada yada. To keep it short, we're going to put it in D tier. And we're just gonna write homo because it's so long. This one is a super interesting one because I can almost guarantee that all of us have literally committed this, everyone watching this video right now. If you're above a certain age, of course. And that's fornication. I didn't even know that this specific word actually only refers to you having sex before marriage, but here we are. Fornication, I'm gonna put it in G, only God really knows whether or not you've done it. Doesn't really affect my life, it barely affects anyone else's life, so I feel like that's a fair tier to put it in. I'm just gonna write foreign, it's a long word, okay? Foreign. Once again, we have one that I can guarantee most of us have done, and that is This one is another one that's not overtly mentioned in the Bible, but a lot of these things can fall under lustful thoughts. I guess when you think about it biblically, you're only really allowed to your spouse, and that wouldn't really be a sin. But no one does that, no one to their spouse. Regardless, if you're a normal person, you usually do it away from prying eyes, so you're probably safe in that, and no one can really know, so I'm gonna put it in D tier. I'm gonna put master with a U because it's a long word once again. Next we have a super interesting one, and I honestly didn't know what to make of this one. That's debauchery. I think in the Bible it's kind of described as like being like too sexual, doing too many sexual things, but I don't really know how to define that in the modern world. I think in modern times most of us have too much anyways compared to what they thought in the ancient times. They did mention hedonistic stuff like and all of that. I'm gonna choose to understand debauchery as like too much of lust to the point that you can't control your actions anymore. Maybe you don't necessarily do it to other people, but maybe you're touching yourself in public without other people knowing, like, weird stuff like that. And obviously by that very definition, I'm gonna have to put debauchery in A. It's definitely something that's not gonna be good for society and not gonna be good for you, and you're likely gonna have some legal repercussions if you get caught doing some debaucherous stuff. I'm gonna put the whole word for this one, it's important enough, right? Last but not least, we have one that's not overt in the Bible, and that is I'm going to choose to put this here because there are definitely passages that you can interpret as being against this action. But it's one of those things that God doesn't overtly tell you not to do, so regardless, it's going to have to go in S tier, of course. Okay, that's all we have for lust. We're going to move on straight ahead to gluttony. And for gluttony, we're going to be using orange to keep it separate from everything else. Up first, we have overeating. This one is definitely a difficult one to weigh, no pun intended. That's because it's really hard to define what exactly is overeating for specific people and what isn't overeating to some. This could definitely be harmful to someone if they're not eating the correct things. Even though it is a very self-defined kind of action, I do believe because it can be harmful, especially if you're doing it every day. For that reason, I'm going to put it in C tier. I accidentally wrote it in D tier, now I have to erase it. Let's hope whatever's next doesn't need to go in D because I have to wait for this to dry. Up next we have something that's definitely a problem to a lot of people, and that is drunkenness. I'm not gonna lie to you, I have a very low tolerance for some very, very overtly drunk behavior. It really just annoys me. With that said, I do understand that it is an addiction and it is something that a lot of people are trying to get over. But obviously, if every day you're getting drunk and you're not really in your right state of mind most of the time, that's definitely going to be harmful to you, and it's possibly going to be harmful to those around you as well. So for those reasons, I'm definitely going to have to put it in B tier. And we're just going to put drunk for this one. This one is something that I never thought about until I actually read up on what I can put into my list of sins. I guess one of the things that fall under gluttony is being too picky or having too rich of a taste when it comes to your food. I didn't know what word to use for that one, so I just put opulence. When it comes to food opulence, I feel like I'm just not surrounded by enough people that I've ever seen actually go too rich with their food. I don't have enough of a monitoring spirit to actually check what those around me are doing in that case. So for this one, I'm actually going to leave it to God to judge. I'm going to put it in God tier. God tier. The next one we have is ingratitude. This one in specific, though, is not being grateful for your food. Once again, a very difficult one to weigh because no one really knows and no one can really tell from the outside most of the time if you're not grateful. But I will say I'm putting it above D tier just because I feel like it is going to affect you mentally if you're just not a very grateful person. It can definitely have some negative effects on your psyche, so I'm going to put it in C tier. For our last in the section of gluttony, we're going to have hoarding. This is obviously hoarding when it comes to food. I don't really know what other word I could have used, so I'm just going to use hoarding. Taking more than you need when it comes to any kind of resource really does irk me and I really don't like it. And I do think this one is easier to weigh and easier to know even if you are an outsider looking in. We do tend to know what is enough to nourish someone and what isn't. For that reason, I'm going to have to put it into B tier. Up next, we have a sin that I feel like just too many of us have, and that is greed. We're going to be using this wonderful color that I don't know how to describe for greed to keep it separated from everything else. At first, we have the illness of the 1%, avarice. I didn't actually know that this word referred to hoarding wealth in specific, and I really like this word now that I know what it means. I could go on and on about how very few people have more money than the masses. I feel like if you're a working class adult, though, I don't need to explain to you why this is bad. For some very obvious reasons, I'm going to need to put it into S tier. For this specific one, I'm using the word theft, which is a legal term. I'm going to choose to understand it as stealing from someone in which you have a position of power over. For example, if you're using a weapon against them, obviously you have the position of power. If you're someone's employer, or if you're much richer than someone else and you're stealing their wages, you have a position of power. Because that's how I'm choosing to define theft, I'm going to have to put it all the way up there in S tier. Up next, we're going to have cheating. Once again, I'm going to choose to define this with a power imbalance. I just feel like it's not fair to put someone who's doing voter fraud in the same category as little Johnny cheating on his little reading exam. If we apply a power dynamic, because most of the worst cases of cheating has a power dynamic to it, it's definitely going to have to go up there in A tier. Next, we have something that most of us do probably every day, and that's lying. I'm including all types of lies with this one, because like I said, we do it very often. Of course, there's different levels to lying, but I'm going to choose to baseline understand this as the most common ways we lie. Usually we lie to try to keep harm away from other people, to try to save their feelings and all of that. Also, because we have slander later on, when we consider these little white lies, I feel like we're going to have to put lying in C tier. We do it very often, but more often than not, they do tend to be more harmless. This one is another difficult one to gauge, and that's materialism. The easiest way to understand materialism is putting more value into material things. I think a lot of us are more guilty of that than the ancients were for sure. If we're choosing to understand it as having more materials than you necessarily need, then a lot of us already do that. For example, a lot of us have multiple vehicles. A lot of us have a computer and a laptop. A lot of us have 2 phones. Materialism can also get to the point where you have so much that you're actually taking away from other people. When it came to me weighing all of these things combined, I'm going to have to put materialism in B tier. A lot of humanitarian crises around the world definitely happens because of materialism, especially when we think about fine materials such as gold. Up next, we have another form of lying, and that's deceit. In this specific case, I'm choosing the biblical understanding of bearing false witness, which means that you are literally lying on someone else. I feel like this needs no explanation because it is within the legal terms as well. We're going to have to put it into A tier. The only reason I'm not putting it any higher is because you can be coerced into bearing false witness. Last, we're going to talk about selfishness. I feel like a lot of us are definitely guilty of this for sure. It kind of goes hand in hand with avarice and hoarding and all of those things when we put ourselves above everyone else. I'm going to choose to define this as doing things for the sake of only yourself, and it is to other people's harm. For example, some people say that divorcing your partner who's cheated on you multiple times is actually bad, especially when you have kids. Some people see that as a very selfish decision, and I tend not to, so it's really debatable in that way. For that reason, I'm going to put it into B tier. With greed now wrapped up, we're going to move right along to sloth. Sloth is yet another category that was actually quite hard to define. I do still think I have some very juicy sins for this one though. For sloth, we're going to be using this beautiful color, and hopefully it's visible with the camera. If not, hopefully you can zoom in. First, in sloth, we have negligence. This one I'm putting as a familial or social duty that either you're choosing not to do or not to do to the best of your ability to the benefit of another person. There are legal terms when it comes to this as well, like for example, if your child drowns in a bathtub, you are negligent. Because obviously that person is under your care and you are responsible for them. For that very reason, we're going to have to put negligence all the way up there in A tier. Next, we have a term that I wasn't very familiar with that I came across when I was actually researching sins for this video, and that's spiritual apathy. I suppose this one is like not really seeking out God or not being spiritual enough for God. This is one of those things that only God can really tell, and for that very reason, we're going to have to put it into God tier. I'm going to write it down as S apathy. Up next, we have laziness. This opinion might get me burnt up a little bit. In my own humble opinion, if someone is being lazy, there is usually something underlying within it. Humans are emotional creatures, and when we're passionate about things and when we actually want to do things, we tend to do them. When someone isn't doing something or doing very little, more often than not, there's something in their life that's weighing heavy on them. For that reason, I feel like our understanding of laziness is often incomplete. So for now, with those situations and those things in mind, I'm going to put laziness in D tier. I know all the parents out there are probably freaking out. Laziness, no, I know. Find a different way to motivate your kid, man. Your kid probably has a lot of energy. You just think they're lazy because they don't want to mess with you. Up next, we have irresponsibility. This one is more centered around your work when you're irresponsible during work. Even during work, you can be responsible for children or other people that are relying on you for their safety. I don't necessarily put like being late as being irresponsible and things like that. I'm putting more of the egregious things that you can do during work. Maybe you cut corners during safety checks and then someone on the field gets hurt. Maybe you keep telling your sick employees to keep coming to work even though you know that they might possibly make other people sick as well. It's a very with great power comes great responsibility thing, so we're gonna have to put it in B tier for Uncle Ben tier. The next one is very connected to something we were just talking about, and that's apathy. Take away the spiritual part, apathy means that you essentially don't really care about yourself or the other humans around you. Once again, more often than not, this is because of an underlying condition. But what makes it different from laziness is often it can put other people in harm's way. If you see someone stalking someone, or if you see someone getting bullied and you don't do anything about it, then you are genuinely putting them in harm's way. For those reasons, I'm going to put apathy up in B tier. Up next, we have one that we're all guilty of, and that's procrastination. This is your lucky day because even though we're all guilty of this, since I'm the judge, I'm actually just going to put it all the way down in D tier. This is because more often than not, when it comes to procrastination, you do still get the thing done. You just don't get it done as soon as you can. Which to me is whatever. Deadlines are usually whatever when it comes to life, you know. It usually only affects one person and that's you, and you usually have the choice whether or not to do it. And I think those reasons are enough to justify putting it in D tier. I probably should have shortened this word, huh? Okay, now that Sid the Sloth is all wrapped up, let's move all the way on to wrath. For wrath, we're going to use this wonderful color that's just so incredibly wrathful. This section in particular is going to be what a lot of people think about when they think about sins. A lot of these harm other people or yourself directly. First up, we have murder. Murder is a legal term. It's not the same thing as killing someone. Murdering someone has intention behind it. An actual intention to do harm, and usually there's a malicious reason behind it. For example, if you're doing self-defense and you accidentally kill someone because they're harming you, that doesn't count as murder. When we take away people defending themselves, there's really no other reason not to put murder all the way up there in S tier. Murder on my mind. Murder on my mind. Up next, we have a very common one, and that's anger. Anger in specific, I'm going to choose to define with angry thoughts, so you're only thinking about angry things. Kind of like the same thing with lust, only really God can tell when you're angry. And I feel like anger is actually much more common than lustful thoughts. For the reason that they're thoughts and they're really hard to gauge whether or not someone's doing it, we're going to have to put it in C tier. It can definitely lead to bad outcomes, but if you're well adjusted, most of the time they definitely just dissipate. Next, we have the action to the angry thoughts, and that's rage. Rage is that point where you're so angry that you actually start doing bad things. You start putting your anger out there, usually to the detriment of other people or yourself. There are safe ways to let anger out, but I'm not including them under the same categorization as rage. Rage in this case is when you start acting out to do harm. And for that very reason, we're going to have to put it all the way up in A tier. This next one is one that I didn't even know the Bible actually talked about, and that's insults. I figured the Bible would have something about it, but I didn't know that it was actually overtly mentioned in the Bible. That's kind of cool. Obviously, there's levels to insults, and when you're doing it around family or friends that you're comfortable with, they're definitely harmless at times. They are still words at the end of the day, so they're kind of hard to gauge in that way. Words definitely have power, but they're not as powerful as actions. So for that reason, we're going to have to put it in B tier. I'm excited that we're starting to fill up our tier list. Up next, we have revenge. I'm probably stricter on this than most people are, but I really don't believe in an eye for an eye. I believe in rehabilitation, not retribution, not revenge, or any of those things. It's not good to seek harm to other people solely because they harmed you in some way. And at times, your get back can actually be worse than what harm is given to you. For that reason, I'm going to have to put it in A tier. Once again, this does not include anything you do in self-defense. If you do something in self-defense, I don't really count it as revenge. This one is a difficult one because I'm actually choosing to separate this from anger, and that's hatred. Hatred does stem from thoughts, but more often than not, they really do lead to actions. When you look at others with hate, whether you like it or not, you are definitely biased against them when it comes to acting out. Maybe if you're an employer, you choose not to hire them because you're biased against them. Maybe if you're a teacher, you choose to be harder on some kids than other kids because you're biased against them. I'm choosing to put that intentionality behind hatred, and for that reason, I'm going to put it up in A tier. These types of sins are definitely ranking the highest so far. Wrath is now wrapped up, let's move all the way on to envy. Obviously, with envy being a green goddess and all, I had to put this marker up there. We are starting this one with the word envy itself. Envy in this case means I genuinely want someone else not to have what they have. Sometimes people feel envy and they don't even want the thing for themselves. Sometimes they just want other people not to have it. I think those thought patterns are usually very destructive and they're never beneficial for society, so I'm gonna have to put it into A tier. Up next we have envy's baby cousin, jealousy. I don't know that I would call jealousy another form of envy, but they're definitely related in that way. Some people find them even hard to differentiate at times. Jealousy usually means that you're afraid to lose something you already have. A lot of the time they don't have the maliciousness that envy has, but they just have this mentality of scarcity, like I'm gonna lose something. As long as it doesn't turn to envy, I'm gonna put jealousy in C tier. I made a mistake, hold on.
Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has those days.
Up next, we have one that a lot of us are guilty of, especially those of us that are a little bit older. And that's gossip. Because we have different words under the sin of envy, I'm going to choose to define gossip as you actually talking about things that are true, but you're doing it in a judgmental manner in order for other people to feel badly or worse about a person. I think talking about other people, especially when things are true and you're having a discussion, is fair enough, even though that can be considered gossip. I don't really consider lying about someone or something like that gossip. I think that's a lot more harmful than what gossip really is. So long as we're talking about true things and it doesn't really affect people outside of the people having the conversation, I'm gonna put gossip in C tier. This next one is a difficult one to categorize because I do feel like a lot of us tend to feel this way. And honestly, a lot of our thoughts in this way does translate to actions, but this one I feel like is a lot easier to fix than the others are. And that's resentment. I think a lot more of us feel this way about other people than we're even willing to admit, honestly. It might even lead to growth in relationships if both of you are mature enough. That said, resentment does tend to stem from things that may or may not have even happened, but usually you feel something about them. So yes, this one is a little bit more internal, but other people can definitely feel it when you resent them. I was torn about putting this one either in B or in C, but I feel like I'm going to go with C for now. This next one has a word that sounds a lot worse than what the action actually is, and that's coveting. Coveting is essentially wanting more for yourself because you're able to compare yourself to other people and therefore yearn for more. I think a lot of us do that, and I think a lot of us do that to our own benefit, actually. A lot of us stay motivated by healthy comparison and by positive pressure in that way. That said, there can definitely be some negative things when it comes to coveting. I don't believe in the evil eye and all of those things, so I feel like only God can really gauge whether or not your coveting is good or not. And for that reason, we're going to put coveting in G tier. It also happens to be one of the 10 commandments, oddly enough. I feel like it's not important to be, but whatever. Last but not least, we have slander. Slander is another legal term. Usually it means you're lying about someone to their own detriment. And yes, for things to be slanderous, it does have to be a lie. Lying about other people in order to harm them and to benefit you is almost never good, so I'm gonna have to put it up in A tier. I do wish as humans we had a better way of knowing whether or not someone's lying, though. With envy out of the way, up next we have a group of lions called a pride. God tends to hate things that are prideful, but honestly I probably have a more positive opinion of prideful things than he does, so let's see what happens. For pride, for absolutely no reason, we have a very beautiful gay color in pink. I'm gonna piss off God with this one, but heresy, I'm gonna need to put you all the way down in G tier. This is because if God exists, only God really knows what he wants all the time. We don't really understand God that well, you know. I feel like a lot of things that we consider heretical are just ways in which people are trying to understand God and they may or may not be wrong. There are definitely doctrines that are considered heresy that I feel like are just reasonable assumptions based on the reading. Regardless of how many debates and arguments we have about it, I just need to put heresy up in G tier. The first 3 in pride are actually going to go down to G tier, and I'm not even going to need to explain much of it. The next 2 are idolatry and being unholy. A lot of what Catholics do, Christians actually consider idolatry, but Catholics consider themselves holy and all of that. Holiness is a concept that only really God can know, considering God is the one that gets to hear your prayers and know if you're repentful and all of that. We're not supposed to judge other people's sins in that way, right? So for idolatry and unholiness, I'm going to put them down in G tier. Up next, we have boasting. A lot of us are definitely guilty of this one. Usually we're using our words to make ourselves feel better. You can definitely use your words to make other people feel worse as well, but I feel like when it comes to words and all of that, I tend to put them lower. Just because a lot of us are guilty of it, and I feel like they tend to be easier to kind of fix than actions are. With that said, I'm going to put boasting in C tier. Next, we have boasting's older emo brother, arrogance. I feel like arrogance tends to be more of your actions and the way you treat other people and see other people. And in that way, I definitely see it as more dangerous than boasting is. It definitely makes you step on other people all the time because you see them as below you. And that's the sin of pride, baby. For that reason, arrogance is going to go in B tier. Last in our group of lions, we're going to have hypocrisy. I have a lot of heat for hypocritical people, let me tell you. It's really one of my pet peeves. I absolutely hate when people are hypocritical. I can't stand it. You give yourself different rules, usually because you think you're better than other people or your situation is different and you're more empathetic to yourself than you are to others. That's usually why people are hypocritical. I'm going to assume that people aren't completely ignorant to their hypocrisy and they know at least part of why they're being hypocritical. For that reason, hypocrisy goes in B tier for me. Okay, that wraps up our cardinal sins. But since I like you so much and you stayed all the way to the end of this video, I'm going to give us some bonus sins that I think should really be in the Bible. For our additional sins, we're going to use black. First up, if you know, you know, we have AI. I have so many thoughts on AI. I think it's literally destroying our humanity as we know it. And our environment at that. But perhaps I'll make a separate video about it in the future. For now, AI goes in A tier. And the better it gets, the higher it goes. Next, we have one that shockingly isn't mentioned in the Bible, and that's perhaps some passages can be understood to condemn, but I feel like it's not overt enough for something that's supposed to be the Word of God. Anyway, I hope I don't need to justify it to you, but that's going to go all the way up in S tier. These next 2 are also going to be S tier for me, and they're not mentioned in the Bible because honestly, God commits the most of them in the Bible. And that is warfare and... Of course, as a modern reader, it's easy for me to judge the ancient people and what they thought about these things. But if God is truly to be the God of love and the God of peace and the God of kindness, I feel like he should have banned this and he should have made sure that we don't get to experience these things. Needless to say, both and warfare definitely go all the way up to S tier for me. With all of these sins out of the way, I feel like you're definitely going to be on the nice list this holiday season. And of course, with our pointed discussion, I really do hope that you keep trying to be nice for the rest of the year also. Hell is really hot and it's really overpopulated, much like Earth, and I'm really so sick and tired of having to corral so many people down there. If you made it all the way up to this point, I hope that you enjoyed yourself, and I hope that you get to watch this before Santa's day comes. I would hate for you to have been on the naughty list when you could have so easily avoided it. Regardless, I hope you have a great rest of your year, and I hope 2006 has a lot in store for the both of us. That's it for me. Bye bye.